Well, for the last few weeks, we've been looking at Romans chapter 8, verses 28 and 29, and we've been discussing God's purpose in our lives. And it doesn't matter who you are, the long-term goal for each believer is the same. Now, the process in getting us to the end of that long-term goal may be a little different for every individual, but it's this: God works all things together for good to them that love God. We've been kind of breaking that verse open and unpackaging it for you, and we've said thus far that God's purpose is good. Notice the text says, all things work together for good. We determined that goodness is not determined by having a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, by having a nice bank account, by our kids never getting sick. Now that's good in an earthly sort of way. But that's not what Paul meant when he said that all things work together for good. You see, the gospel works as well in Haiti as it does in Memphis, Tennessee. And so what he means by good is not earthly comforts. It's not the American dream, but it's the goal to make us and mold us into the image of His Son. So from God's perspective, anything that does that is good. Then we saw that it's active, that God sometimes is most active when we think He's least active. He's working behind the scenes, and that's S-E-E-N, not S-C-E-N-E. God is working behind what we see to accomplish His purpose. Now, let me introduce the third point. God's purpose is not only good and active, but God's purpose is all-inclusive. Notice what he says, and we know that some things work together for good. Is that what it says? No, that's not even in the Amplified Version. It says that all things work together for good. In other words, God's plan for our life includes everything that He allows to come into our life. Doesn't matter if it's perplexity, it doesn't matter if it's financial problems, it doesn't matter if it's health problems, it doesn't matter what happens, God uses it all. The word all means exactly what it says. If we're saved, remember the two prerequisites? We're saved, we love God, we're surrendered to the purposes of God. If those two things are true in our life, then God allows nothing to touch our life but what He can use to further His purpose. Now, I'm thinking of something Ron Dunn said, my friend Ron Dunn, who's in heaven now. He made a statement years ago after his son committed suicide, and he was brokenhearted, but he went back to his home church and he preached this sermon. And in the sermon, he said this: God knows every sparrow that falls, but the sparrow still falls. You know, we're not immune to hurt and to struggle as believers, but God uses all of that. So God's purpose is all inclusive. Let me say one more thing and we'll finish our thoughts on Romans 8, 28 and 29. Not only is God's purpose good and active, all inclusive, but God's plan and purpose is harmonious. Notice what it says. We know that all things work together for good. In other words, God intermingles the dark threads and the light threads, the good experiences, the bad experiences, the happy times and the sad times. The poet said, not until the loom is silent and the shuttle cease to fly will God unroll the pattern and explain the reason why. The dark threads are as needful in the weaver's skillful hand as the threads of gold and silver in the life that He has planned. So my dear friend, take heart today. God is at work in your life as a believer. That is a good thing. God is working to conform us to His image. Even though it's painful, it has wonderful results. God's active. So when you don't know or feel that God's around, take it by faith. He is. God's plan is harmonious. God takes into account all things that He allows to happen to us. My dear friend, we'll never attain full Christ-likeness in this life, but God tells us that our goal is to know Him, to know Him. And so make that the pursuit of your life. God bless you.